Well, folks, it's a beautiful day and a beautiful weekend for so many out there of faith. And today we are talking about Walt Disney the man, because Walt Disney the company now seems to hate the values, the traditions that he held to be so valuable, so important. That's why today we call this more like the Bob Iger company than the Walt Disney Company. Many times we wonder, how much longer will they even revere the man himself who created the mouse? Today we've got someone in the house who's going to tell us what were the actual beliefs of Walt Disney. Folks, this is a conversation worth listening to. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Pro Channel. For those of our Jewish friends out there, we hope you've had a very meaningful Passover season. And for Christian friends out there, we wish you an exceedingly happy Easter. Kids, get out there and find those eggs. Get on it. Let's go. Get your Easter baskets. All right, joining us today is Ed McCray. Ed, is it fair to call you a Disney historian?
I'm a reluctant historian. I just know all these things because I grew up with it.
All right. Well, if there's ever a Disney trivia game out there, you want to call Ed for your lifeline. Well, Ed, I discovered you because you did a 12-part series, and we're going to have a link to the channel that hosted you, and I was so very impressed by that. Ed, I wanted to have you on today to talk about the beliefs and values of Walt Disney and why, in my estimation, the company itself now seems to very much dislike the man. So let's get right to it and leave the audience wanting not. Let's start, Ed, where it seems to have started, and that is with Walt's parents. Can you talk to us about who his parents were, what their beliefs were, and what might have been instilled into a young future animator?
Well, Walt's parents were Elias and Flora Disney, and Elias was a very strict Congregationalist because he came from a family of 11 children, and all the others turned away from God. That's why he was such a strict Christian with his own family, and he's painted as a villain almost today and a lot of the historical stuff, but Walt didn't feel that way. He always talked very lovingly about his father, even after he'd passed away.
What was the relationship really like between Walt and his dad?
His dad was stern. If you look at the movie Johnny Tremaine with how the uncle there, the landlord, Ephraim Lampum, that's the character's name, how he was portrayed in that film as stern but principled, that's a lot like what his father was. You'll see a lot of references to Walt's family in his films. Walt's father would play the violin. He learned to play the fiddle for when they'd find strangers that would stop by, and they'd feed him and take care of him for the night. He'd play the fiddle with him. That scene is in Darby O'Gill and Little People, and that's actually Elias's fiddle in that film.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
I just learned that this week.
Wow, that's beautiful.
That's what I mean about how there's always references to Walt's family in his films. Everything Walt made filtered through him, and that's why his faith and values matter, because it's in everything he did.
Okay, so Ed, I agree. It's been painted, and from what I had heard, was that Walt's dad was very stern, sort of standoffish, not necessarily supporting his son or his sons and what they were doing.
He didn't like frivolity, didn't like even candy or anything like that. The reason two of his brothers ran away from home was because they bought a pocket watch, and his father didn't like that, and he was just very stern. But all of the children, they revered their parents. They took care of them in their old age and everything. And that's
you're saying then, I think this is the crux that we really need to get down to. You're saying that Walt's dad loved Walt and that Walt loved his dad.
Yeah. And you got to remember the times and everything this was in. It's not like today where people talk about their feelings and everything. It's different. Patriarch was different.
Life was distinctly difficult and hard.
Yes. And with Walt's name, we didn't mention this. Walt's named after the family pastor. The pastor named his son after Elias. They both were expecting children. Close. Yes, they were expecting children at the same time, and they named their sons after each other. And Walt's father also preached at the church sometimes when the pastor was away. He built the sanctuary for that church. His mother played the organ, was the treasurer for the church. Walt's mother.
So Walt's pretty close to being a pastor's kid.
Yeah, I guess you could say
pretty close. I mean, if your dad is speaking in front of the church in lieu of the pastor when he can't be there, that's
they close. Also they did devotions around the dinner table and everything. You'll see a lot of that in the old Disney films. This was a typical way of being raised back at that time, and that stuck with Walt. Even though he He didn't wasn't a church tender later in life, but because he was kind of rebelling against how strict his father was, but he still held these family values and Christian values, because you can see it all through his works.
So then let's go to, I guess, a deeper question. What were Walt's views as an adult as he was creating a company that would eventually push its narratives and stories and all of those embedded values all over the world? What were the values of Walt?
Well, he wrote 3 different articles about his faith where he actually talked about it. You always see in the official histories, they'll say that he hated religion and everything, and that's not true. 1949 Guidepost, he wrote an article about the power of prayer, and it had, for the artwork, it had a praying Mickey and Donald in a church. And I would like to have a hard copy of that. If anyone wants to contact me with it, I will make it available. He wrote How Prayer Helps Me in 1955 as an article, and it so moved his brother Roy, he had those printed up and they gave them out for guests at the park.
So hold on. That's quite the claim. So you're saying that Walt wrote about his own prayer life, right? His own time spent with the divine, with talking with God, and that was so meaningful to his own brother that they passed this piece of information out at the park to just regular park goers?
It would be for guests if you stayed in the hotel or whatnot. The Hilton Hotel did the same thing. That was very common.
If you stayed at a Disneyland hotel, then
you received a card.
You received a card about Walt's prayer life.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. All right, Ed, I'm learning stuff. Listen, I think I know a lot. I'm learning things.
I'll give you a quote. I'll give you a quote that's from this. I have a strong personal belief and reliance on the power of prayer and for divine inspiration. That's
I knew that, and I'd read that. I did not know that they gave it out to guests at the Disneyland Hotel in the early days. I had no idea.
The third article he wrote was in a book called Faith is a Star. And in that one, he said in this article, I have watched constantly that our movie work is of the highest moral and spiritual standards, and they are upheld whether it deals with the fable or stories or live action. So, I mean,
So hold on a second then. So when it says, what was the title of that again?
Faith is a Star. It was a book from 1963, and they talked to all kinds of people in Hollywood where they wrote about their Jewish faith, Christian faith, Catholic faith.
Well, the reason I was asking about that is because I've often wondered if some of the stories that Walt was responsible for, if they are allegories for faith. And so I'll give you an example, right? Yeah. So when you wish upon a star, I've always wondered if that's a stand-in for the divine, right? That you're looking to the heavens. But I've never known. And some would say, well, that's proof that Walt was not a person who believed in God or who prayed to God. You're saying that there's direct contradiction in what Walt said himself.
I'm just saying what Walt said. So, sometimes when you see pictures of him alone in the park, you wonder if that's what he was doing. That's when he was spending time with God. Speaking of the films, I have a book from the early 1940s where they talk about Fantasia, what the premise of Fantasia was. And it was about man's search for God. And this is right in the book. And I've seen histories in the modern time on Fantasia, and they don't mention this at all. Each sequence in that film is about how man fills his void for God with something else. He fills it with nature, fills it with fake God. Then you have Night on Bald Mountain, where evil shows up, and that's when man finds God. That's how they defeat Chernobog. The church bells ring, he winces and disappears, and you see them all going through the nature there. And the reason they go through nature and not a church is because Waltz always felt that you could commune with God in nature, because that's his creation more so than in a man-made church. And I see. That's paraphrasing, but you can see that in the work. And you see in Snow White where she prays over the 7 little men who've been so kind to her and make Grumpy like her. That's right in the film. He's not an anti-Christian person. You have Les Posadas in the 3 Caballeros. That's where they do the Christmas tradition where they do the search of the wise men, or the quest of the wise men there. Right. And you have Johnny Appleseed's probably the most Christian of the shorts, and that's in Melody Time. And when Winston Hibbler pitched that to Walt, he said to go and make it. And he was crying at the end of the pitch. He got very moved by stories, if you didn't know. Right. Very emotional. And the film's so dear to my heart, that was very personal to Walt. He did so much with that film. No one even remembers it today. But all through that film is the theme of faith and prayer And you see it in some of the animated shorts, how there's the biblical stories are part of the little boy growing up in that film. And then even at the climax, the aunt or the grandmother that was raising him talks about how she was praying for the lamb that was lost in the story. But nobody even sees that film anymore.
So Ed, what do you think? And I'll tell you another short that I think is calls back and harkens back to the biblical corpus, and that is Lambert, the sheepish lion, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's very strong symbolism with the lion protecting the lamb.
Well, look at how that's been co-opted now.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, okay, so Ed, let me ask you this then. So what were Walt's views on family values?
Well, they're very traditional family values. Mother, father, raising the family within the home. Everything he did also depicted that. You have the Mickey Mouse Club. That was kind of like a Boy Scout club with Mickey Mouse in the center. But Walt hired a youth pastor to lead the Mickey Mouse Club. He knew he was a youth pastor. Jimmy Dodd and his wife Ruth, they ran the Hollywood Bible Society. And you always hear the story how he hired Jimmy Dodd was Jimmy went to pitch a song to Walt about the pencil song. And Walt always saw through what people could be when he met them. And he knew who Jimmy was. He saw he could be the leader of the Mickey Mouse Club, and that's what he hired him to be. And Walt didn't know this just before this. Jimmy Dodd and his wife had been praying for a ministry because Jimmy was thinking of leaving Hollywood, and they saw the Mickey Mouse Club as their ministry. And Jimmy was sick with blood cancer through that whole show, and people were always afraid he was going to pass away. He didn't die until about two weeks after they were done filming the entire run of the Mickey Mouse Club. It was like 7 years later, and he's on the Mickey Mouse Club. He would sing songs that he had wrote about. They were the hymns of the Bible. They were things that do what the good book says. They would be known as Doddisms today, but they were based on Judeo-Christian values. And you can get there's a photo they would give out at the studio if you'd write for a picture of the Mickey Mouse Club, and it looks like a Sunday school photo. The kids are holding a sign, "God bless the Mickey Mouse Club." And I think this is the reason why you don't see the Mickey Mouse Club today, is because they don't want you to see all these songs and hymns. That there were albums even put out, or they were the only Christian albums really that Disney put out, where they were Jimmy Dodd singing church hymns or these Christian songs he'd written.
No, I've never thought about that, about why they would want to keep the Mickey Mouse Club hidden. Never thought about it. Ed, let me tell you about one of the most meaningful videos that we've ever done on the channel. Mm-hmm. So very early on in this channel's history, about 3 months into its creation, we had the true honor of hosting Valerie Stewart, who is the daughter of Nick Stewart being one of the absolute first Black voice actors in Hollywood. He might as well be the father of all Black voice actors. And he played the part of Brer Bear, mm-hmm. both in Song of the South and in the Disneyland version of Splash Mountain. One of the things that I find to be most distasteful has been the disparagement, not only of the ride, not only of the movie, but also of Walt himself, because I consider it to be a huge crowning achievement that Walt Disney, who at the time was not the biggest movie studio in the world, a guy who basically was just into children's content, right? Making mm-hmm. cartoons and cartoon movies.
Family.
Right. That he went to such a degree as to put a Black man in the lead role, and the man won an Academy Award for the very first time in the history of Hollywood. That's incredible. And that has been utterly maligned. So could you talk about on the racial side of Walt's values? I've heard from Valerie. She passed away shortly after the interview. And I, that's a very sad thing. I would encourage folks to go watch it. Yeah. But, she said that her family was treated like family in the Walt Disney Company until the 90s.
Her father said that Walt treated them like kings. I've got that quote.
All the way until the 90s. So what was Walt's view on all of that?
Walt didn't see race or any of that stuff. He treated people as people. With Song of the South, as you mentioned, he loved James Baskett. The original plan for that was there was going to be a series of Uncle Remus films, but James Baskett passed away. And Walt confronted the racists in Hollywood to get him that Oscar. There was a fight the night before that award show where you had all of the different factions pitted against each other. And one of the factions said, well, we can't give it to James Baskett because it should go to a Black actor who's played a doctor or lawyer. And the argument against that was who's making those roles for black actors.
And that comes back, Ed, to where my understanding from talking to Valerie, and this may not have been in the video proper. I wish it had been, but my understanding is that the original conflict with Song of the South came from political and black organization groups wanting sort of directorial oversight, and that was a step too far for Walt, and he couldn't do that, and that's why there was this sudden change where they disagreed, and it's altered the narrative for decades now.
Well, it even goes deeper than that. I'd also have read that the head of the NAACP at that time, he wanted to play Uncle Remus, and Walt didn't want him. And so that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I didn't want to go in that level of specificity, but yes.
Well, sorry,
I appreciate it. No.
So, interesting thing with Song of the South, before they made that movie, the original concept of that one was going to be a completely animated feature. Was Uncle Remus had a prayer meeting with the animals, and they were going to build a church where the carnivores and the plant-eating animals, they all got together in harmony and peace.
You know, I actually, Ed, boy, okay, so if I could get my hands on evidence of that for this channel, I'll do an entire video on that.
I'll run articles on
it. Ed, let's get together after we do this, because that needs to be out there. That Song of the South was originally to that level, because you know, we live in a world where people want to continuously break the glass ceiling that's already been broken. They want to be the virtuous. They want to disparage those who seem to have been the achievers. It's the deconstructionists versus the constructionists. It's the how do I want to put this? It's the
postmodernism.
So I want to do this without being utterly disparaging. Let's just put it into this phrase. Just about anybody can kick down and destroy a barn. It takes an architect to put it back up, or a construction builder to put it back up. So we'll say that lots of people can destroy. It's not easy to build. So Ed, let me ask you this then. Where we are today is very different than where we are, and I'm not trying to deify Walt Disney. I'm not trying to say that he was a perfect man.
No.
I also am not trying to suggest that Disney is intrinsically, at its foundation, Christian or Judeo-Christian. I'm not trying to build a theological case for the company. What I am trying to say is that the company that we have today is vastly different than the one that Walt envisioned. So Ed, could you talk to us about, in ways that YouTube would permit, can you talk to us about how the company has changed and it is no longer inside the realm of what Walt had envisioned?
Well, I think when Walt was alive, his company celebrated and projected American values. There's several quotes where he talks about that's why he made the films he made. That's why he made Disneyland. It was a World's Fair of American values, and all people from all over the world saw it that way. That's why they always came here from other countries, the world leaders, to Disneyland. And it's not like that anymore. Now they kind of hate America as founded, and they've made everything's multiculturalism to the point where it's watered down. Like that last movie about the dragon, you couldn't even tell that was a Disney movie because it felt like it was made in another culture. And before, everything filtered through Walt. And I'd also
are you talking about Raya the Last Dragon?
Yes, that's the one. I didn't know if I was allowed to say it.
No, don't feel too bad, Ed, because that's based on Cambodian folklore, and the Cambodians don't understand what the heck it is either. So it's not through any kind of real lens.
If you look how it used to be, like people go to Studio Ghibli films because you're filtering Japanese culture through those films. People used to go to Walt Disney films no matter where it was in the world because it filtered American culture through the Disney lens. And that started with Walt. It went on today. And another way America has changed, the world has changed, is when Disneyland opened. At the opening ceremony, they had a prayer over the park led by Walt's nephew, who was a pastor, Glenn D. Puter. And he even blessed the park as long as they keep the values that God will bless this under his hand, this endeavor. And there were 3 military chaplains there at the same event. This happened right after Walt gives that famous clip we all see where he does the benediction of Disneyland, where he talks about Disneyland is your land and all that, the dedication. Right after that was this prayer. And I've got a link to it we can talk about later, but you can see this prayer that was at the park. They don't even talk about it, never mention it. And Walt wanted to build a church in Disneyland on Main Street. And it was his nephew that told him that would be kind of disrespectful to God because it's a for-profit enterprise. They were going to rotate different denominations of ministers each week to do a sermon.
Well, that's interesting, Ed, because Dollywood actually did that, right? So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the theme park in East Tennessee that's run by Dolly Parton, they actually have a church inside the park. So I see the argument made originally.
Well, before they didn't do things because they thought it'd be disrespectful to Christianity and God and everything, but now they don't do things because they hate Christianity and God.
Well, Ed, there's a big, well, I don't know if it's big, and maybe I shouldn't even say this because it will make it big, but I'll go ahead and say it. There's a minor controversy where some want the model of the experimental city of tomorrow inside Magic Kingdom. Right there, if you get on the People Mover in Tomorrowland, there's a little display that shows what Walt had envisioned
Progress
originally.
City.
Right, Progress City, and there's a church with a Christian symbol there, the cross, and there's a controversy. People want that taken down because it's a reference to a religion.
In the original film that he shot, was the last thing that he filmed. He talks about there will be churches in Epcot and where they would be located, churches and parks. So I didn't know that there was a controversy, but that's interesting. It should be how Walt wanted things, envisioned things, because fundamental things like this didn't change. He brought in in the parks, they did a live nativity when Walt was alive, and that got carried over to Disney World long after Walt was gone, and I have footage of that.
Right.
They did a pageant, a Christian pageant. They would put the Star of Bethlehem on top of the Matterhorn. That was the highest point in Disneyland. They had a ceremony where Santa Claus put it there, and the wise men would search for the family in Disneyland, and they would have a live nativity.
So, folks, this video and this conversation is not meant to proselytize you. It's not meant to try to persuade you to be of any particular belief system. It's simply a historical reference to what Walt was inspired by and what he did with his own life and why he did the things that he did. They're intertwined. So the ideas that he brought forth for making the world a joyous place and giving families a place to go be families, well, you can't separate that out from the man who appears to be praying on Main Street. You can't separate that out from the man who seems to be letting others know about his own prayer life and that sort of thing. The man who is named after apparently someone of faith, a clergyman, a pastor. And so that is all to say that we need to take all of that into account when we're understanding who Walt was, why Walt did what he did, and why it was so tremendously successful. And then I would suggest that we should look at where that ultimately made such a hard shift, which I think truly came about under the Bob Iger era of the company.
Yeah.
I don't think that Disney should, with its current makeup, be a quote-unquote Christian corporation. But it should not be hostile to the fundamentals that Walt began this company with. It should not be a company out to disprove and to disparage the core tenets of the major faiths out in the world. Ed, give me your final thoughts on all that, please.
Well, I would like to add to what you just said. If you look at the film that Walt made, Darby O'Gill and Little People, it was an Irish Catholic community. You'll see in the background, there's references to that. Kocho takes place in Mexico, and that's a Catholic community. There's no references in the background of that stuff at all. But every other film they do on any other faith, they all bog it down in that. And I think that the person that really held a lot of this back was Roy Jr., because after he passed away, that's really when this woke stuff started invading the company, infiltrating it, and it just kind of skyrocketed in 2015, 2016. And
someone had presidential aspirations. At
I know.
time.
We noticed that. We observed that too when we were doing our 12-part shows. And a lot of the films that Walt made, Iger has said that he will never release it. And he kind of laments that Roy put those out there, the war cartoons, the early Mickeys and everything. And even something like The Scarecrow of Romney Marsh, where you have a pastor who's confronting the government during the American Revolution. And you have Pollyanna, where you have some of the views Walt had on faith in that, where the pastor was being used by the community, the leader of the community who was controlling everything, and nobody can control church. That's in the actual film there, Pollyanna. And a lot of these films, if they're on Disney Plus, they've started to edit things in them. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Oh yes, I'm fully aware.
I'm glad I have hard copies of all this.
Well, folks, I highly recommend, and we've got the links down in the video description. I recommend you go begin the journey of that 12-video historical look at Walt, at the company, and all of those things. It is magnificent. It's how I discovered Ed. And Ed, I want to thank you for coming on, and I want to finish this way. Folks, when they talk about Song of the South being problematic and terrible and awful and should never be seen, when they talk about other parts of Disney, the early Disney catalog being problematic and should never be seen, when they label and misalign the content on Disney Plus, when they make it where not even children can see it, what they're doing, folks, is they're making a statement about Walt himself. You cannot divorce the creator from the creation, and they will come for Walt eventually.
Oh, yeah.
They're just stepping gingerly in that direction. Folks, if you like content like this, consider clicking the like button, share, subscribe, click it, stick it to the algorithms, it's the notification bell, drop a comment down below and let us know your thoughts. People of all faiths, values, backgrounds, thoughts, and persuasions are welcome to join in because this is an open community of friends. Also, folks, make sure you check out Ed McCray wherever you can. Fantastic stuff. Follow him, please.
RediscoveringWaltDisney.com. I've set that up, and we have some footage that backs up what I've said there on the Rumble channel.
RediscoveringWaltDisney.com, folks.
Yep.
Click it down below. All right, folks, you have a wonderful day today. We're hoping, we're wishing, we might even be praying that you have a tremendous time with family and friends. Folks, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun. Hey folks, Wednesday, April 3rd is the Disney shareholders meeting where we find out if Nelson Peltz has a seat on the board or if the proxy war continues on. Coverage begins at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time with Culture Casino. Moving right over to the Pro Channel, a special edition of the Pro Show, 11 a.m. until 1 p.m. Eastern, and then we go to Valiant Renegade for live coverage, 1 p.m. Eastern until who knows when. It is the big day for Disney.